Welcome to another Crypto Spendthrift interview session. I'm here with Josh from Uledger, and just give us a brief overview of Uledger to start off, Josh, before we really start diving in deep.
Is a stateless blockchain protocol. And so what that means is that we work with a company's existing technology infrastructure to enable them to become blockchains in the real sense of the word. So we call ourselves a data integrity company, and we do that by underpinning a company's technology infrastructure, allowing every transaction to be recorded and logged on an immutable blockchain audit trail. And when I say transaction, that could mean a million different things. It could be a financial transaction, it could be a journal entry, it could be an email, it could be a contract. Everything that happens on a customer's database or databases is hashed, timestamped, and logged on an immutable blockchain audit trail that is pretty unique. Our approach to blockchain is pretty unique. So we're the first stateless blockchain protocol out there, and I think the best way to describe it to the layman is that we're a public-private hybrid blockchain. Mm-hmm. And so, the issues with public blockchains is that they aren't scalable, and for a company who has private data,
all out there.
Going to get all out there, right? So there's two big issues there. Now, with the private blockchain, they're scalable and they keep a company's data private, but you have to trust the people running the private blockchain. And so our approach is unique in that we allowed a company to create their data private. In fact, we want nothing to do with their data. That's just a liability for us. And so what we do is we hash and timestamp the metadata, and the hash, timestamp, and metadata is published to a public blockchain. And because every database and every client becomes their own blockchain, it's infinitely scalable. So that's Uledger in a nutshell.
Okay, so can you kind of dive a bit deeper on how Uledger enables companies to just go from normal database operations to having this blockchain capability? Because a lot of other alternatives out there kind of force people to totally change their the way they manage their information in their company. Well, I see this one's more like adapting blockchain to the company.
Yeah, that's a great question and great point. In fact, when we started Uledger almost 3 years ago, we started the company making a couple assumptions on what the product has to do and what it has to look like. The first is that it has to work with the company's existing technology. Otherwise, it's just not going to be adopted. It's too expensive. It's, if they have to rip and replace what they have, they could spend $10 million on a blockchain technology stack, and it could end up not working. So it has to be adaptable and work with what they currently have. The second assumption was that it has to keep their data private. Especially when you look at companies like a hospital or a doctor's office that has very private, protected data. Excuse me. And the third assumption was that it has to scale infinitely. Because, data isn't like crypto transactions. There's so much more data transactions in a business than there are cryptocurrency transactions, especially when you get into a large business. And so Talon, our co-founder, CTO, my co-founder, CTO, came up with this blockchain protocol where it can be very easily and seamlessly integrated to a company's infrastructure via either an API or an on-prem installation. So API-based is definitely the easier route to go and will work for most companies. But when you get into very large companies and large data amounts, the on-prem installation is going to be the route to go. So without digging too much into the technology, that's our approach.
Okay, so how does this hybrid blockchain solution kind of maintains itself? Because people who are more familiar with cryptocurrencies are more like familiar with the more traditional routes of kind of verifying transactions, either through like proof of work, proof of stake, or delegated proof of stake.
Yeah, good question. So with every customer that we have, they become a Uledger node. Mm-hmm. And in fact, each company could have several nodes. And each node, and right now there's probably 50 of them. We imagine a day when there's going to be thousands of them. Each node contains the audit trail, which is very, it's very data efficient. It's a cryptographic hash, a timestamp, and then it's got the metadata that only makes sense to the company who owns the data. So every node owns everyone else's audit trail. And in that way, they gain consensus on the truth of the data, much kind of like a public blockchain. And so you have every company who is a node who is corroborating the data of everybody else. Now, let's say you're, Target, for example. You're using Uledger and an auditor comes in and says, look, I want to see your blockchain audit trail so I can do this audit, so I can rely on the integrity of your data. You download your blockchain audit trail or access it, and you have a way internally that matches each transaction on your database to the blockchain cryptographic hash, timestamp, and description of the metadata. So it's very easy for you to make that connection. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, I was actually about to ask about financial audits and such.
Yeah. In fact, I used to be an auditor with Deloitte for a few years, and it was my experience there that led to the starting of Uledger. So I guess let me give you a little bit of context. I started my career at Deloitte in their audit practice, went on to get my MBA, worked in private equity, and then after that I was working for a startup in Utah that was looking at blockchain for a very different use case. It was they were trying to create a reputation economy play, which is a really cool idea. It's going to be really hard for someone to pull that off, but I hope it happens. But anyways, when I learned about the technology, I immediately saw a connection to the audit world, where companies pay auditors hundreds of thousands of dollars to go in and look at their data and write an opinion attesting to the accuracy or integrity of their data. Whereas blockchain, as you know, is this mathematical, immutable log of everything that happens. And so, if somebody tried to manipulate the data, delete a journal entry, delete a transaction, delete an email, not only is there a log of that, but you can quickly find out who did it and when they did it. So from an audit perspective, it comes in very handy. In fact, for any regulatory compliance perspective, it comes in handy.
Yeah, I've definitely been noticing that a lot of the big accounting firms have been digging deep into blockchain and seeing how useful it is to kind of take some workload off of them for their audit processes. Yeah,
absolutely. We've actually built a proof of concept with one of the big four. That's pretty cool. It's not really audit related, but what we do, and we've presented this to some of the biggest banks in the world, and there's a lot of interest, is we combine our blockchain technology where you have this base layer of data that has integrity, you can rely on it, and then we add machine learning to analyze that data. So you've got data integrity. The machine learning is analyzing data that can be proved to be accurate at some point in time. And the two technologies combined are used to predict and prevent financial transaction fraud. So that's been really exciting to work on.
So, does that kind of tie into? I noticed you have a feature that's kind of a feature that sends out alerts when there's possible data inconsistencies. So, does that kind of tie into that?
Yeah, exactly. It's a little bit different. So one of our products is a logging product. So I'm sure you guys know this, but every company has these data logs that they use to analyze and keep track of their data. And when there's some kind of hack, they go back to these logs and try to see what happened. Now, bad actors are getting so sophisticated that they're actually going to these logs, hacking the logs, and covering their tracks on them, which is, it's incredible. In fact, that's what happened with, there's been a bunch of examples, but the Social Security hack that happened a couple of years ago, they didn't find out that it happened for, days or maybe even a week until after it happened, because the hackers covered their tracks on the audit logs. And so with Uledger, you have this blockchain-backed immutable audit log that not only is very hard, if not impossible, to hack, but it gives you a very clear picture of what happened, and then add just a simple comparison algorithm to that. You can be alerted as to when somebody tried to change the audit log.
So technologies like Uledger, it makes it seem like the world's going to get significantly more transparent. Do you think so, or?
Yeah, that's one of our goals. So we would love for every single database to be backed by blockchain, Uledger's blockchain if possible. And so there's data integrity and transparency and trust across the board. In today's world, it's very hard to rely on a company's data. When we first started Uledger, the whole Hillary Clinton email scenario was going on, where it was hard for anyone to know exactly what the truth was about those emails. Using blockchain in government for email specifically or anything, you can rely on the fact that investigators or people are getting a whole accounting of what happened. So I see government being a very big opportunity. Any public company, any company that is regulated or has data that other people rely on, they can really benefit from something like this.
Yeah, especially since they don't have to go through the arduous process of like upgrading their infrastructure to support something like this. So it was definitely a good move on your part to try to make it adaptable with existing infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you. That's one of our big competitive advantages. I do see eventually as more and more people adopt blockchain and the technology becomes more sophisticated, I see there being eventually an entire new database infrastructure that has blockchain built into it. But I think this is the first step. Let's work with what you already have. Maybe there will never be a need to rip and replace what you have because of the way that we've designed this. But it's a very easy way for a company to start testing out the technology within their environment.
So you're talking about emails and such. So you think Uledger could play a big part of reducing identity fraud and especially like phishing scams, because that is a very, very prolific thing in crypto right now, is phishing scams from people pretending to be dev teams.
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time on that actually. So by augmenting our blockchain technology with some kind of identity authentication app, or maybe even partnering with somebody who's really working on identity authentication, it could really mitigate phishing and whale attacks. I was at a conference in Utah last Friday, and I forget his name. He's the CEO of Evernym. He gave a really interesting talk about what they're doing on the identity authentication front. There's a lot of good work being done on that, but Hello, you still there?
Yeah, you cut out for a second.
Okay, yeah. I was just going to say that I think Uledger's core competency is around blockchain infrastructure.
Mm.
And so when it comes to identity authentication, I think our approach would be to partner with somebody who's working on that.
So jumping off the whole authentication, I noticed you have a concept of three-factor authentication on your website. So can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, so this gets back to the identity authentication mobile app that we are developing. And it's a really interesting approach. So everyone has and knows what two-factor authentication is, an email, a password, or something like that. Now, it gets interesting when you put some kind of mobile device into the picture. So every single mobile device, every single phone, when that person gets the phone, if you go through, especially if you go through some kind of provider like Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, they've authenticated your identity as required by law, and the technology, the hardware in the phone actually authenticates part of your identity for you. So using that identity authentication plus some other identity authentication factors that already exist, give you three-factor authentication, which becomes a lot more reliable all of a sudden.
So can you kind of compare that to like the existing two-factor authentication methods, which are the most common is the SMS, which is really bad, and most people are migrating off of that from crypto. And then there's a lot of dedicated applications for certain places like exchanges. Usually you can find like use the Google Authenticator or another one.
Yeah, the problem with those is that they can be hacked and manipulated. They're certainly better than just the email address and password and what people have been using historically. But one, they make it it's not a very seamless process. It's time consuming. A lot of people, especially those who aren't technically sophisticated, just don't go through the effort to do that, to download the Google Authenticator or whatever else it might be. Mm-hmm. And so when you start using the phone, whatever device they have, it's pretty seamless. There's no extra step you have to go through. Most phones now have some kind of biometric component to it. So using the phone as one of the factors in authentication, which by the way you have to have built into your technology stack, makes the authentication process a lot more seamless.
Also, I kind of want to point out the fact that a lot of people, when they're migrating migrating to a different either phone or number, they have a lot of trouble kind of taking those authenticators off and, preparing it for their next device. Is there kind of a solution for that on your side? Especially with the case of something as simple as just getting a new phone but still having the same number.
Yeah, great point. So, with our solution, and I don't want to get too far into this. We're right in the middle of patenting the technology or attempting to patent it. But for whatever device you're using, as long as that device has been authenticated by your cell phone provider, it has your biometric information, then that can be used to authenticate yourself.
Okay. So now I want to kind of go into, you already mentioned one use case of Uledger that is happening right now, and I noticed you have a couple more on your website. So do you want to kind of dive into those and give everybody like a full view of what's Uledger already being used for?
Yeah. Let me give you I gave you the big four one. We have a number of clients, and the use cases vary a lot, as you can imagine. So the city of Boise is a customer of ours, and they've got a roadmap to integrate Uledger throughout their entire infrastructure. But the low-hanging fruit at the time that we met with them was using blockchain to authenticate utility bills. And specifically, so when you buy a home or sell your home, there's that month where you have to prorate the utilities. Mm-hmm. And it's not big dollar amounts, but surprisingly, there's a lot of conflict around that. And so adding a blockchain component where title companies and owners of the home and buyers of the home can come and see the prorated utilities and rely on that data using blockchain, and then have an immutable record for regulatory compliance is something that they see as being really valuable. Now, eventually it'll be infrastructure wide, where you're putting criminal records and all other government type information on the blockchain. What else? We have quite a few clients. There's a big data company. I'm not sure I can name, but they're in the process of integrating Uledger to authenticate streaming data, where it's not just resting. You actually have large amounts of data that are streaming, and the issue is that at any point in time, how do you know that you have the full data set? We have an accounting firm using us for their clients' accounting records, just to have that immutability and auditability like we discussed earlier. We have a company that uses it for the asset securitization process, where you have many different companies and parties that rely on the same data, and the company that needs the data next in line has to rely on the data that was input previously. And so putting blockchain into that scenario has been valuable for them.
Seems like you got a wide amount of use cases that could be implemented.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing about blockchain in general. There's so many different use cases, especially as a blockchain infrastructure play, that it's kind of honestly been one of the struggles that we've had. What is the low-hanging fruit? What's the best niche to get into?
Yeah, because you could definitely expand in a lot of different things.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's medical records, there's auditing, there's identity authentication, but again, as an infrastructure play, we can kind of address all of that, and then allow other companies or other blockchain companies even to build apps on top of Uledger's infrastructure to focus on something that's very specific.
Well, I feel like this has been a very good discussion, very educational on like the use cases and kind of giving people a hint of what's coming on the kind of verification side of blockchain. Do you want to add anything else? Here's your moment to kind of advertise or kind of tell people what you're doing or what things to look out.
Yeah. So we are right in the middle of going through the regulatory compliance steps to do a security token sale. And, being a US-based company who helps companies become regulatory compliant, we definitely want to make sure that we are completely conservative on the regulatory side of things when it comes to a token sale. And so we're right in the middle of a financial audit. We're working with attorneys to get ready to do a security token sale. We are currently doing a pre-sale with bonuses depending on the amount that you invest. But I'll just throw that out there. If anybody has questions, please reach out to us and we can give you more detail. What else? We're always looking for companies who want to test our technology. And what we typically do is we give them a free sandbox where they can play with it and get used to it. And then from there, they can figure out where to best implement it. So we're growing quickly, and we're happy to talk to anybody that has any questions.
All right. Thanks for being on the podcast, Josh. It sounds like a lot of good things to come, especially with Uledger. And I'd love to have you again sometime in the future once, down the line, once things are more established, so we can like catch up and compare like what we discussed today with the results that actually happened. So
yeah. Thanks for having me. I'd love to talk again. That'd be great.
So this has been another episode of the Crypto Spendthrift Interviews. Rate the podcast and tune in for the next episode.